You've actually talked a lot about the separation of state and economy, right? How do you like? I wanted to bring up Hollywood because there's a lot of oversight from the government as far as tax breaks related to projects in Hollywood. Do you see that as something that's gotten worse over time? I was reading something about a month ago where they're looking to add quotas that if they don't make good faith gestures to meet certain quotas as far as demographics by the year 2024, that they'll lose a certain amount of their tax breaks, which were originally bonuses that they were giving these companies to keep them in California when they were all started moving to Georgia and Chicago to do all these productions. Is this one of those things that you're seeing that a lot of, sorry to switch the subject matter
jump
here, but
over,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
a lot of what they're doing that direction, is that because of these tax breaks?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I've worked in Los Angeles. I did a job there, Rookies, FBI, and then before that, I want to say it was The Closer, which was several years before that. Every other
Keira Sedgwick.
Keira Sedgwick.
Yep.
Every other job I have is in Canada or some other state.
Because everything goes to Vancouver.
Everything goes to Vancouver. Vancouver, I mean, I've watched it grow up from when I first started working there in the early 90s to now. It's just a thriving metropolis. Despite all the regulations, it's still thriving, but in part because all of Hollywood pretty much has moved up there and to Toronto,
Yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed so much.
Montreal.
The X-Files started out in Vancouver and then eventually moved to California once it
Yes.
was big enough and they had the clout to say we want to move it down there, and then you didn't have to watch them try to make every city, like every woods in Vancouver look like some Midwestern town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many shows do that. Yeah, and I was actually in one of the first episodes when they moved back down to California.
Vancouver? Yeah. Do you think that for something like this, you've talked also a lot about like BlackRock, pulling your money out of BlackRock if you want to get as far as investment, ESG and stuff like that. Do you think that this is also something that you should be applying that same logic to for companies like Disney, which do seem to be making things and do base a lot of their projects on this type of investment, that you should be speaking with your dollar, and if you see something from them, don't watch it?
Yeah, if you disagree with the beauty of capitalism is that you have total sovereignty and control over your own life, and if you don't like what a company is doing, how they produce their product, or what it is they stand for, then you vote by withholding your dollar from them.
There's an interesting point though in the size of these companies where we're at the point we know Disney is doing bad things. The example I like to use is the thanking the Xinhua security forces who are keeping these Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps. They thanked them in
Mulan.
It was Mulan, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the people who are cognizant of what's happening say, okay, we better boycott this, but 90% of the people just don't know, don't care, and they keep funding it, which empowers this machine to keep doing crooked things. We don't have enough knowledge among the population to resist that.
They just lost like 258 million between Strange Worlds and Lightyear, and they're about to lay off 1,000 more people. And I mentioned this in like a video. I mentioned this in a video recently. I said like Disney lost all this money. Like that's nothing to them. And I'm like, yes, but you can only do that for so long.
Yeah.
Before it starts.
And it's much more powerful and much healthier than say a DeSantis, taking political action against a company that whose policies he doesn't agree with. Yeah. I think that's very scary. That's what makes DeSantis a scary character to me.
But so I guess my point was, I agree with the vote with your dollars, but I don't think it's effective when you have these big pharmaceutical companies that are untouchable. Granted, fair point. The laissez-faire guys always want to bring up the government subsidizes them to the point where it doesn't matter what the public does. But there are big companies that their profits are so high you can't move the needle.
Yeah, but it's only because they're subsidized. Because not being subsidized means they are dependent upon the market and have to produce values for that market and have to be receptive to the market.
But what I mean is the market doesn't care about things like aspartame or high fructose corn syrup. We like.
Sure, it would. It would.
You think it would?
I think. Look, if we didn't have a regulatory state where people just cut themselves off from, if they cut themselves off from their own safety. They put that completely in the hands of the government, so they ignore that aspect of looking into products. We would have a private regulatory system where people would start organizations that gave you information with respect to companies and products, and you would look into things like that on your own, and you would become a more knowledgeable producer. So what I'm saying is the regulatory state
now, though.
It is possible now, but for the most part, when you have an apparatus that does the work for you, you're not going to do the work, right? We all know that the government sucks the air out of the private sector in every respect. It doesn't just kill business, but it also kills your intent to defend and protect your own life.
People assume the job's already being done. We don't need another one.
Exactly.
But I also think
that's why sorry the interruption, but that's why something like the FAA makes our skies less safe, because any
stop signs.
Well, stop signs. Well, I'm saying any airline without an FDA would have to probably link its safety record to its sailability, and the safest airline is the one you'd probably want to fly. It would become an aspect of the marketing.
So I read this. I don't know if it's true, so feel free for those listening to correct this, but I was reading that stop signs have potentially increased accidents because before, people would always stop out of a fear of getting hit. So when cars were first coming about, everybody would slow down at intersections to look and then carry through if it was safe. When they created stop signs to create the forced safety, so if you've got a one-way stop sign, people will fly through, and then someone who blows a stop sign creates an accident.
Yeah.
Whereas it was always stop. Humans naturally would take that action among themselves. The government action actually made it worse. But what I will say in regards to high fructose corn syrup and other garbage, one of the arguments we often bring up when it comes to capitalism versus regulation or whatever is that big companies, as I mentioned, will become too big to fail, or they'll produce products that are
Never
bad.
happened in the market.
Well, but I'm thinking about it, and I think the argument
it only happens in a mixed economy where government and economics are linked together at the hip, and the government is.
But I'm talking about
like
morbid obesity, right? Like America's becoming more and more obese because we have high sugar, high salt foods. Fats are actually really good for you, by the way. But you know what I was going to say is, this may sound once again callous, but if people, I ultimately agree with you in the end. If there's no regulation, or regulation doesn't matter,
no state regulation,
but none of it matters. If companies mass produce things that kill people, those people will die, they won't have kids, and the future will just end up being people who are more fit and don't like high fructose corn syrup. Right? So
well, I mean, I think
it may be cold, but
I think that is also a monster of the regulatory state, right? The corn subsidies that make people produce this stuff and make it cheap.
I'm pretty sure that's the only reason we have it, actually.
Sugar subsidies as well.
I'm pretty sure high fructose corn syrup is only possible because of corn subsidy.
Yeah.
It's actually harder to produce than sugar from beets or cane or cane.
There you go.
And because the U.S. government's like, make more corn, we make so much of it, we figured out how to make plastics and fuel and sugar syrups. But my point is basically, let people have free will. The people who are prone to gargling sugar to the point of death will die, and but they'll have been happy the whole way down. And then the future will end up being people who don't do that just by natural selection. It's cold, and I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying that's what will happen.
Maybe, maybe not. Maybe once they don't cede their moral authority to some government bureaucrat, they'll stop doing the bad things because they will be entirely responsible for their own lives. Right now, they're not. They're not responsible for
and they want free health care.
Yeah, they're not responsible for almost any aspect of their life, and I think 50% of the population now is in some respect tied to the government dole.
Ugh.
So it's a huge constituency that has to wean itself off of the drug of government.
You think abolish the police?
Should we abolish the police?
Yeah, abolish the police.
No.
You don't think so?
No.
Well, I would assume your position wouldn't be in the leftist camp of cops are bad, but more so in they should be private, right?
No.
You don't think so?
Force is a public issue.
Oh, really?
Force is not it's not a market. It's wherever force is, there's no market, right? Force is always a monopoly. If you break into my house, and I contend with you, each of us is going to try to assert our will over the other, and one of us will win.
Yeah.
And that's not a market. There never is a market. So a market and force organizations is called war. That's what the Soviet Union and America were doing through some of their proxies over the Cold War. So no, you can't market force. You can certainly have private security so long as you're under the umbrella of an objective system of law, and you're beholden to that.
What about the fire department? Private?
Mostly private. I think it was that's not force. So
Right.
yeah, mostly private. Probably tied to insurance companies, and if insurance were private and free and
Well, so we actually
less
have
expensive.
volunteer fire departments out here.
Yeah.
And they just ask you to donate, and I'm a big proponent of giving them as much money as I can.
Sure.
It's like one of the last remnants of honor we have in this country is people deciding to go and sign up to be a volunteer firefighter with no pay just because they want to make sure everyone is safe.
Hey, and there's going to be free riders in a system like that, but that's okay. It's okay.